Good evening and welcome back to Northanger Abbey. I hope you enjoyed part 1 and thank you for listening to more. I realised that when I was talking about things that sprung out to me, which were new, in the first couple of chapters, something I didn't mention was the amount of language that Austen uses that is vocabulary connected to Gothic literature, that is very melodramatic and over the top, and she's using it to apply to very, very mundane matters. And I think that's something I'm going to look out for increasingly. She just seems to be doing that the whole time, writing about mundane things with very elevated and melodramatic vocabulary. Anyway, onwards into the next 2 chapters, which contain introductions to 2 of my favourite characters in all of Austen. Enjoy. Chapter 3. Every morning now brought its regular duties. Shops were to be visited, some new part of the town to be looked at, and the pump room to be attended, where they paraded up and down for an hour, looking at everybody and speaking to no one. The wish of a numerous acquaintance in Bath was still uppermost with Mrs. Allen, and she repeated it after every fresh proof which every morning brought of her knowing nobody at all. They made their appearance in the lower rooms, and here fortune was more favourable to our heroine. The master of ceremonies introduced her to a very gentleman-like young man as a partner. His name was Tilney. He seemed to be about 4, 5 and 20, was rather tall, had a pleasing countenance, a very intelligent and lively eye, and if not quite handsome, was very near it. His address was good, and Catherine felt herself in high luck. There was little leisure for speaking while they danced, but when they were seated at tea, she found him as agreeable as she'd already given him credit for being. He talked with fluency and spirit, and there was an archness and pleasantry in his manner which interested, though it was hardly understood by her. After chatting some time on such matters as naturally arose from the objects around them, he suddenly addressed her with, "I have hitherto been very remiss, madam, in the proper attentions of a partner here. I have not yet asked you how long you have been in Bath, whether you were ever here before, whether you have been at the upper rooms, the theatre, and the concert, and how you like the place altogether. I have been very negligent, but are you now at leisure to satisfy me in these particulars? If you are, I will begin directly." "You need not give yourself that trouble, sir." "No trouble, I assure you, madam." Then, forming his features into a set smile, and affectedly softening his voice, he added with a simpering air, "Have you been long in Bath, madam?" "About a week, sir," replied Catherine, trying not to laugh. "Really?" with affected astonishment. "Why should you be surprised, sir?" "Why, indeed?" said he in his natural tone. "But some emotion must appear to be raised by your reply, and surprise is more easily assumed and not less reasonable than any other. Now, let us go on. Were you never here before, madam?" "Never, sir." "Indeed! Have you yet honoured the upper rooms?" "Yes, sir, I was there last Monday." "Have you been to the theatre?" "Yes, sir, I was at the play on Tuesday." "To the concert?" "Yes, sir, on Wednesday." "And are you altogether pleased with Bath?" "Yes, I like it very well." "Now I must give one smirk, and then we may be rational again." Catherine turned away her head, not knowing whether she might venture to laugh. "I see what you think of me," said he gravely. "I shall make but a poor figure in your journal tomorrow." "My journal?" "Yes, I know exactly what you will say. Friday. Went to the lower rooms, wore my sprigged muslin robe with blue trimmings, black plain shoes, appeared to much advantage, but was strangely harassed by a queer half-witted man who would make me dance with him, and distressed me by his nonsense." "Indeed, I shall say no such thing." "Shall I tell you what you ought to say?" "If you please." "I danced with a very agreeable young man introduced by Mr. King. Had a great deal of conversation with him. Seems a most extraordinary genius. Hope I may know more of him. That, madam, is what I wish you to say." "But perhaps I keep no journal." "Perhaps you are not sitting in this room and I am not sitting by you. These are points in which a doubt is equally possible. Not keep a journal. How are your absent cousins to understand the tenor of your life in Bath without one? How are the civilities and compliments of every day to be related as they ought to be, unless noted down every evening in a journal? How are your various dresses to be remembered, and the particular state of your complexion, and the curl of your hair to be described in all their diversities, without having constant recourse to a journal? My dear madam, I am not so ignorant of young ladies' ways as you wish to believe me. It is this delightful habit of journalising which largely contributes to form the easy style of writing for which ladies are so generally celebrated. Everybody allows that the talent of writing agreeable letters is peculiarly female. Nature may have done something, but I am sure it must be essentially assisted by the practice of keeping a journal. I have sometimes thought, said Catherine doubtingly, whether ladies do write so much better letters than gentlemen. That is, I should not think the superiority was always on our side. As far as I have had opportunity of judging, it appears to me that the usual style of letter writing among women is faultless, except in 3 particulars. And what are they? A general deficiency of subject, a total inattention to stops, and a very frequent ignorance of grammar. Upon my word, I need not have been afraid of disclaiming the compliment. You do not think too highly of us in that way. I should no more lay it down as a general rule that women write better letters than men, than that they sing better duets or draw better landscapes. In every power of which taste is the foundation, excellence is pretty fairly divided between the sexes. They were interrupted by Mrs. Allen. My dear Catherine, said she, do take this pin out of my sleeve. I am afraid it has torn a hole already. I shall be quite sorry if it has, for this is a favourite gown, though it cost but 9 shillings a yard. That is exactly what I should have guessed it, madam, said Mr. Tilney, looking at the muslin. Do you understand muslins, sir? Particularly well. I always buy my own cravats, and am allowed to be an excellent judge, and my sister has often trusted me in the choice of a gown. I bought one for her the other day, and it was pronounced to be a prodigious bargain by every lady who saw it. I gave but 5 shillings a yard for it, and a true Indian muslin. Mrs. Allen was quite struck by his genius. Men commonly take so little notice of those things, said she. I can never get Mr. Allen to know one of my gowns from another. You must be a great comfort to your sister, sir. I hope I am, madam. And pray, sir, what do you think of Miss Morland's gown? It is very pretty, madam, said he, gravely examining it, but I do not think it will wash well. I am afraid it will fray. How can you, said Catherine, laughing, be so, she had almost said, strange? I am quite of your opinion, sir, replied Mrs. Allen, and so I told Miss Morland when she bought it. But then, you know, madam, muslin always turns to some account or other. Miss Morland will get enough out of it for a handkerchief or a cap or cloak. Muslin can never be said to be wasted. I have heard my sister say so 40 times, when she has been extravagant in buying more than she wanted, or careless in cutting it to pieces. Bath is a charming place, sir. There are so many good shops here. We are sadly off in the country. Not but what we have got very good shops in Salisbury, but it is so far to go. 8 miles is a long way. Mr. Allen says it is 9, measured 9, but I am sure it cannot be more than 8. And it is such a fag, I come back tired to death. Now here one can step out of doors and get a thing in 5 minutes. Mr. Tilney was polite enough to seem interested in what she said, and she kept him on the subject of muslins till the dancing recommenced. Catherine feared as she listened to their discourse that he indulged himself a little too much with the foibles of others. What are you thinking of so earnestly? Said he as they walked back to the ballroom. Not of your partner, I hope, for by that shake of the head your meditations are not satisfactory. Catherine coloured and said, I was not thinking of anything. That is artful and deep, to be sure, but I'd rather be told at once that you will not tell me. Well then, I will not. Thank you. For now we shall soon be acquainted, as I am authorised to tease you on this subject whenever we meet, and nothing in the world advanced intimacy so much. They danced again, and when the assembly closed, parted, on the ladies' side at least, with a strong inclination for continuing the acquaintance. Whether she thought of him so much while she drank her warm wine and water, and prepared herself for bed, as to dream of him when there, cannot be ascertained. but I hope it was no more than in a slight slumber or morning doze at most. For if it be true, as a celebrated writer has mentioned, that no young lady can be justified in falling in love before a gentleman's love is declared, it must be very improper that a young lady should dream of a gentleman before the gentleman is first known to have dreamt of her. How proper Mr. Tilney might be as a dreamer or a lover had not yet perhaps entered Mr. Allen's head, but that he was not objectionable as a common acquaintance for his young charge he was on inquiry satisfied, for he had early in the evening taken pains to know who her partner was, and had been assured of Mr. Tilney's being a clergyman, and of a very respectable family in Gloucestershire. Chapter 4. With more than usual eagerness did Catherine hasten to the pump room the next day, secure within herself of seeing Mr. Tilney there before the morning were over, and ready to meet him with a smile. But no smile was demanded. Mr. Tilney did not appear. Every creature in Bath except himself was to be seen in the room at different periods of the fashionable hours. Crowds of people were every moment passing in and out, up the steps and down, people whom nobody cared about and nobody wanted to see, and only he was absent. "What a delightful place Bath is," said Mrs. Allen, as they sat down near the great clock after parading the room till they were tired. "And how pleasant it would be if we had any acquaintance here." This sentiment had been uttered so often in vain that Mrs. Allen had no particular reason to hope it would be followed with more advantage now. But we are told to despair of nothing we would attain, as unwearied diligence our point would gain. And the unwearied diligence with which she had every day wished for the same thing was at length to have its just reward. For hardly had she been seated 10 minutes, before a lady of about her own age, who was sitting by her, and had been looking at her attentively for several minutes, addressed her with great complacence in these words: "I think, madam, I cannot be mistaken. It is a long time since I had the pleasure of seeing you, but is not your name Allen?" This question answered, as it readily was, the stranger pronounced hers to be Thorpe, and Mrs. Allen immediately recognised the features of a former schoolfellow and intimate, whom she had seen only once since their respective marriages, and that many years ago. Their joy on this meeting was very great, as well it might, since they had been contented to know nothing of each other for the last 15 years. Compliments on good looks now passed, and after observing how time had slipped away since they were last together, how little they had thought of meeting in Bath, and what a pleasure it was to see an old friend, they proceeded to make inquiries and give intelligence as to their families, sisters, and cousins, talking both together, far more ready to give than to receive information, and each hearing very little of what the other said. Mrs. Thorpe, however, had one great advantage as a talker over Mrs. Allen, in a family of children, and when she expatiated on the talents of her sons and the beauty of her daughters, when she related their different situations and views, that John was at Oxford, Edward at Merchant Taylor's, and William at sea, and all of them more beloved and respected in their different stations than any other 3 beings ever were, Mrs. Allen had no similar information to give, no similar triumphs to press on the unwilling and unbelieving ear of her friend, and was forced to sit and appear to listen to all these maternal effusions, consoling herself, however, with the discovery, which her keen eye soon made, that the lace on Mrs. Thorpe's pelisse was not half so handsome as that on her own. "Here come my dear girls," cried Mrs. Thorpe, pointing at 3 smart-looking females, who arm in arm were then moving towards her. "My dear Mrs. Allen, I long to introduce them. They will be so delighted to see you. The tallest is Isabella, my eldest. Is not she a fine young woman? The others are very much admired too, but I believe Isabella is the handsomest." The Miss Thorpes were introduced, and Miss Morland, who had been for a short time forgotten, was introduced likewise. The name seemed to strike them all, and after speaking to her with great civility, the eldest young lady observed aloud to the rest, "How excessively alike her brother Miss Morland is!" "The very picture of him, indeed," cried the mother, and "I should have known her anywhere for his sister," was repeated by them all 2 or 3 times over. For a moment Catherine was surprised, but Mrs. Thorpe and her daughters had scarcely begun the history of their acquaintance with Mr. James Morland before she remembered that her eldest brother had lately formed an intimacy with a young man of his own college, of the name of Thorpe, and that he had spent the last week of the Christmas vacation with his family near London. The whole being explained, many obliging things were said by the Miss Thorpes of their wish of being better acquainted with her, of being considered as already friends, through the friendship of their brothers, etc., which Catherine heard with pleasure, and answered with all the pretty expressions she could command. And as the first proof of amity, She was soon invited to accept an arm of the eldest Miss Thorpe and take a turn with her about the room. Catherine was delighted with this extension of her Bath acquaintance, and almost forgot Mr. Tilney while she talked to Miss Thorpe. Friendship is certainly the finest balm for the pangs of disappointed love. Their conversation turned upon those subjects of which the free discussion has generally much to do in perfecting a sudden intimacy between two young ladies, such as dress, balls, flirtations, and quizzes. Miss Thorpe, however, being 4 years older than Miss Morland, and at least 4 years better informed, had a very decided advantage in discussing such points. She could compare the balls of Bath with those of Tunbridge, its fashions with the fashions of London, could rectify the opinions of her new friend in many articles of tasteful attire, could discover flirtation between any gentleman and lady who only smiled on each other, and point out a quiz through the thickness of a crowd. These powers received due admiration from Catherine, to whom they were entirely new, and the respect which they naturally inspired might have been too great for familiarity, had not the easy gaiety of Miss Thorpe's manners and her frequent expressions of delight on this acquaintance with her softened down every feeling of awe, and left nothing but tender affection. Their increasing attachment was not to be satisfied with 6 turns in the pump-room, but required, when they all quitted it together, that Miss Thorpe should accompany Miss Morland to the very door of Mr. Allen's house, and that they should there part with the most affectionate and lengthened shake of hands, after learning to their mutual relief that they should see each other across the theatre at night, and say their prayers in the same chapel the next morning. Catherine then ran directly upstairs and watched Miss Thorpe's progress down the street from the drawing-room window, admired the graceful spirit of her walk, the fashionable air of her figure and dress, and felt grateful, as well she might, for the chance which had procured her such a friend. Mrs. Thorpe was a widow, and not a very rich one. She was a good-humoured, well-meaning woman, and a very indulgent mother. Her eldest daughter had great personal beauty, and the younger ones, by pretending to be as handsome as their sister, imitating her air and dressing in the same style, did very well. This brief account of the family is intended to supersede the necessity of a long and minute detail from Mrs. Thorpe herself of her past adventures and sufferings, which might otherwise be expected to occupy the 3 or 4 following chapters, in which the worthlessness of lords and attorneys might be set forth, and conversations which had passed 20 years before be minutely repeated. I had forgotten the context in which the famous quote, "Friendship is certainly the finest balm for the pangs of disappointed love," was, and I am not disappointed. As usual, quotes are taken out of context with Jane Austen. That may well be a true stricture, but certainly very ironic in the context in which it is being used. Have a lovely evening.